Picture this. A man standing 6 feet, 6 inches tall, commanding 200 outlaw bikers across Florida. His phone tapped by federal agents, recording 2,990 conversations in just 1 month.
My phone was wiretapped for the time I was there, and they, in 1 month, they interrupted, there was 2,990 some phone conversations.
A leader facing 3 murder charges, surviving 3 trials, and walking away, acquitted. But this is just the surface of Jim Nolan's story. From founding the Iron Cross Motorcycle Club to becoming the Outlaws' patriarch in Florida. From orchestrating the merger of 4 major motorcycle clubs to facing 59 years behind bars, the numbers tell a tale of power few can imagine. Yet the most staggering statistic? 0 infractions during 35 years, 3 months, and 11 days in federal prison.
I did 35 years, 3 months and 11 days in prison, in jails in prison, without a break.
What transforms a man from a hardcore criminal into a gospel music songwriter?
Just like the first song I wrote was in the Pima County Jail, and that was Put the Prayer Back into School. That wrote out in 15 minutes while I was waiting for Jimmy Swaggart to come on TV.
How does someone who controlled an empire spanning from the Gold Coast to the Panhandle become an outreach director at a biker church? This isn't just another redemption story. It's a journey through 4 decades of motorcycle club history, 15 parole board rejections, a battle with pancreatic cancer at 75, and a transformation that defies explanation.
I was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. I was 75 years old.
Welcome to the story of Big Jim Nolan, former Outlaws leader, born-again Christian, and living proof that no one is beyond redemption. Jim Nolan entered the world in 1943. His childhood was anything but ordinary, with 5 brothers serving in World War II, 2 in the Navy, and 3 in the Army. The age gap between Jim and his siblings was substantial, with his youngest brother being 17 years his senior.
I had 5 brothers, and that was a crazy thing. 5 brothers and 2 sisters, but my youngest brother was 17 years my senior. So I had quite an upbringing. I had, 6 fathers and 3 mothers.
Life began on a 21-acre chicken farm in West Long Branch, New Jersey, where young Jim's father worked for Wagner Pie Company before retiring to manage the farm.
I was raised down there. I stayed there until I was 12 years old. I was raised on a 21-acre chicken farm with my dad barn when he retired from Wagner Pie Company in New Jersey.
Have you ever wondered how someone's early years shaped their future path? For Jim, this question would prove particularly significant. Everything changed in 1955 when, at age 12, the family relocated to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Feeling isolated from his siblings, who had their own families, Jim convinced his parents to buy him his first motorcycle, a 1951 Harley Davidson.
My dad got sick, and when I was 12 years old, we moved to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And that was interesting, 1955. And the following year, because they had taken me away from all my brothers and sisters because they all went out and had families and everything else.
Remember those teenage dreams of freedom? Jim sold his parents on the idea by claiming he'd use the bike saddlebags for a paper route.
I felt pretty bad, so I conned my mother and father into buying me a motorcycle so I could deliver papers and get a job, And I picked a full-dress Harley Davidson motorcycle, and I completely convinced them, see the saddlebags on the back, you can turn around and deliver papers real easy. A total impossibility, but it sounded good, Motor doubles didn't fit on the back.
Briefed well.
So that was my introduction into motorcycles.
The reality was different. At 6 feet 6 inches and 165 pounds, the 13-year-old Jim stood out among his peers.
But at that time I was a little bit larger than most kids at 6'6", about 165 pounds. Kind of slim.
In Florida during that era, anyone could ride a motorcycle at 14 with a restricted license.
At that time, you could ride any kind of motorcycle or motor scooter or anything in Florida with a restricted license. You got them at 14.
The local police, seeing his size, rarely questioned his age. His father worked as a bartender at the Travelers Lounge on Sunrise Boulevard and A1A, while his mother held a prestigious position at Bennett Interiors. In fact, she became the charter president of the American Business Women's Association of Broward County. But tragedy struck in 1960 when Jim's father was diagnosed with cancer. The doctors gave him 6 months. He fought for 18.
And then my father, and like he was ill, and he died of cancer. They gave him 6 months to live. He died 18 months later.
During this period, young Jim was already developing his identity in the motorcycle world. The foundation was being laid for what would become a legendary figure in motorcycle club history.
I've pretty much had a motorcycle at all times to right now. I've always been into bikes.
These formative years, from the New Jersey farm to the Florida streets, would shape Jim's path in ways no one could have predicted. The motorcycle that was supposed to be for a paper route, that was just the beginning of a much larger story. Would you like to know what happened next? Well, the 1960s would bring changes that would reshape not just Jim's life, but the entire motorcycle club landscape in Florida. The early 1960s marked Jim's emergence in West Palm Beach. During an era when rebellion was in the air, he made a decision that would change Florida's motorcycle culture forever. Do you know what happens when leadership meets opportunity? The Iron Cross Motorcycle Club roared to life under Jim's guidance. It wasn't just another club, it was different. With his towering height and charismatic presence, Jim commanded respect naturally. The Sun Sentinel would later describe him as an intelligent leader with long, wavy brown hair and a full beard. Everything shifted in spring 1967. The Chicago-based outlaws dispatched Donald "Deke" Tanner to Florida with a specific mission: establish a chapter in the Sunshine State. What followed was a masterclass in strategic alliance building that would reshape motorcycle club history in the South. Jim saw an opportunity. Working with Tanner, he orchestrated a massive merger. The Iron Cross, the KKS, the Half-Breeds, and the Outcasts all came together under one banner.
Nolan began an association with Tanner and assisted him in merging various Florida biker gangs, including the Iron Cross, the Cossacks, the Half-Breeds, and the Outcasts, to form the Outlaws' South Florida chapter.
Do you understand the significance of unifying such diverse groups? It was unprecedented. The historic patchover ceremony took place at Kitty's Saloon, a roadside bar on State Road A1A in Juno Beach, in July 1967. Picture this: a dozen cabins behind the saloon, rented from owner Bertha "Kitty" Randall, became their first official clubhouse. The South Florida chapter of the Outlaws was born. Jim initially served as vice president, while Tanner took the president's role.
In 1967, we merged with Chicago and became the Outlaws of Florida. And I got to be president of that club, and for the next couple of decades, I was the boss.
The club quickly gained attention. Some wanted, some unwanted.
In the 60s and 70s, everything was sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I mean, you turn around, you look at the, Johnny Carson show, and everybody up there is stoned every night. They're high, and they're going. I mean, it was real cool. So I mean, it wasn't like motorcycle clubs back then, but everybody was kind of wacko.
Florida Governor Claude R. Kirk Jr. publicly vowed to drive them out of the state. Jim's response? In a December 1967 interview, he famously dismissed allegations against the Outlaws as hogwash, adding, "So we have long hair and beards. Well, so did Jesus Christ. and he's been around a lot longer than Governor Kirk. Under increasing pressure from law enforcement, the chapter relocated to Fort Lauderdale.
I got busted on and off all through the 70s. I spent as much time in jail trying to make bonds. I spent more money in bonds and lawyer fees than people give me credit for. For all the 70s, I was stayed drunk, stayed high, did whatever I wanted to do.
They established their headquarters in an unincorporated neighborhood southwest of the city. The membership swelled to approximately 200 members and associates at its peak. The groundwork was laid. The pieces were in place. But this was just the beginning of a story that would span decades and change lives, for better or worse. Want to know what happened when Jim took full control? That's where our story really gets interesting. The winds of change swept through Florida. Jim Nolan, now at the helm of the South Florida Outlaws chapter, began implementing his vision. Think about what it takes to control an entire state's motorcycle culture. That's exactly what he set out to do. Under his leadership, the Outlaws expanded rapidly throughout Florida. His strategy? Simple but effective. Throughout the early 1970s, Jim masterfully orchestrated the amalgamation of smaller motorcycle groups. The Regents in Jacksonville fell in line. The Iron Cross in Orlando followed suit. Biker historians credit Jim with something bigger. He convinced the Outlaws' Midwest leadership of the strategic importance of controlling the southern United States, particularly Florida. Do you see the chess master at work? By the mid-1970s, Florida had the largest concentration of outlaws in the entire United States. The rules were clear and strict. No one retired from the club, period. The consequences for attempting to leave? Severe. The organization operated with military-like discipline under Jim's watch. During this time, the club's activities evolved from traditional motorcycle club operations to more sophisticated enterprises. Consider these numbers. The chapter grew from a handful of members to over 200 members and associates. Jim served as both president of the Fort Lauderdale chapter and regional president of the Outlaws in Florida for more than a decade. His influence stretched from the Gold Coast to the Panhandle. The crime reporter Scott Bernstein would later describe Jim as the Outlaws' overall patriarch in the Sunshine State. But what made him so effective? Perhaps it was his ability to adapt. As times changed, so did the organization's focus. When one revenue stream declined, another emerged. By the mid-1970s, Jim's influence reached its peak. The club had transformed from a local motorcycle group into a powerful organization with tentacles reaching across the state. Law enforcement took notice. The pressure began to build. But here's the question that haunted both allies and enemies. How long could one man maintain such control? The answer would come sooner than anyone expected. The late 1970s were approaching, bringing with them winds of change that would alter everything. Life can change in an instant. For Jim Nolan, 1978 marked the beginning of a storm. 3 murder charges landed on his desk, all connected to the 1974 deaths of 3 Hells Angels members in a quarry near Andytown. The legal battle was intense. Picture this: 3 separate trials spanning from 1978 to 1979. The first 2 ended in hung juries. Do you believe in third-time luck? Jim did. He was acquitted in the final trial. But the system wasn't finished with him. In 1980, while handling appeals for drug charges, Jim found himself in Arizona.
I was immediate parole. I was supposed to go home December 21st of 1979, and I finally did get released September 30th of 1980 to Tucson, Arizona. Because I had a couple of nieces and nephews living out there.
Remember that saying about frying pans and fires? His phone was tapped. Law enforcement intercepted 2,990 phone conversations in just 1 month.
My phone was wiretapped for the time I was there, and they in 1 month they interrupted. There was 2,990 some phone conversations.
The pressure mounted. Tax evasion charges hit next, $120,000 worth. The government seized everything, his property, his mother's house, everything they could reach.
I was a West Coast representative of Dream Enterprise in a David Allen Cole band.
Okay.
And that was my job. It was just, yeah, it wasn't for real. But later on, as it turned out, I got charged for not paying taxes and everything else. They came back on me on that because of, they said I was making $500 a week pay on that and I wasn't paying taxes on it. So long around the middle of 81, I was charged with tax evasion. I owed them $120,000 and they took everything I owned.
His mother, suffering from Alzheimer's, was placed in a public-funded rest home where she would spend her final decade. Then came July 11th, 1981. At the Bashful Bandit, a Tucson biker bar, an argument over a jukebox song ended in gunfire. 13 rounds were fired. John McQuillan was hit 8 times. Jim was arrested immediately.
And I'm in the Pima County Jail, charged with murder and anything else that they could come up and throw on. And when they arrested, I got out on bond for first-degree murder and parole violation, and was out on bond for a few days. And then the feds came in and arrested me for. They came to the house with a warrant because of the gun that was used in the alleged murder, and they found 3 other guns in the house. So they turned around and I got locked up on that.
But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. In 1982, while awaiting trial, something profound happened. In a jail cell in Flagstaff, Jim Nolan, the feared motorcycle club leader, found Jesus Christ.
When I accepted the Lord, the next morning I go walk into the courtroom and I tell my lawyers I just accepted Jesus. That was the first people I've talked to. That's the first person I could tell who's human that I was, and I didn't even know you were supposed to say it out loud, but I just told them that.
The transformation was dramatic.
I'm sitting in the jail cell and I'm reading the Bible, and all of a sudden I felt like, things are really weird. People had told me to read the book of Paul. And you know, as I later found out, Paul don't have a book. So I read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I read all 4 of those up there. Now I'm rereading Luke. And all of a sudden something came on me. I don't know what it was, but it came on me, and I started sobbing and crying. I was really, I always said later, I was really glad that happened alone, and I didn't have a bunch of people around. It was kind of, and in the jail cell that they had me in was one of those little Gideon Bibles that they give out. That's small. That's got the New Testament, and I remembered that looking at it, the sinner's prayer was on the back page. And I remembered that. So I went ahead and said the sinner's prayer in the back. And if you're real, God, if this is all real and all that other stuff, it was like taking a 15-pound Valium. I mean, I just went like this. And it was great. I felt relaxed.
The man who once ruled Florida's motorcycle world started writing Christian songs. Put the Prayer Back in School became his first composition, written in just 15 minutes while waiting for Jimmy Swaggart to come on TV.
Just like the first song I wrote was in the Pima County Jail, and that was Put the Prayer Back into School. And that wrote out in 15 minutes while I was waiting for Jimmy Swaggart to come on TV.
And then it happened. RICO trial for the South Florida chapter of the Outlaws. The numbers tell a compelling story, facing 59 years in prison.
Well, I ended up with 59 years. So what happened is I got found not guilty of everything out there, but then they hit me with RICO. Okay. I was due to go home in 1987 from Arizona. I beat everything. The only thing I had was that federal gun charge, and that was over in '87. Well, in 1986, the government, charged me and 15, 16 others with RICO, and that was in Broward County, Florida. South Florida chapter of the Outlaws were charged with RICO.
Throughout his incarceration, he never spent a single day in segregation. His wife never missed a visit, despite his transfers between facilities in Terre Haute, Allenwood, Miami, and Coleman. What makes a man change so completely? Was it divine intervention or just survival instinct? The answer might lie in what happened next as Jim Nolan's story entered its final chapter. Ready to discover how this remarkable journey concludes? The final chapter awaits. Change came quietly. Inside the federal prison system, Jim Nolan began walking a different path. Unlike typical jailhouse conversions, his transformation ran deep. Ever wonder what genuine change looks like? His prison record tells a remarkable story. 0 major infractions in over 3 decades. A Bible ministry flourished under his guidance. He played music for church services, turning House of the Rising Sun into Amazing Grace.
I did the House of the Rising Sun, but the words I used was Amazing Grace. Little things like that. That started off, way back in the federal system.
The same charisma that once led a motorcycle club now drew people to worship. Parole hearings became a familiar routine. From 1997 to 2012, Jim appeared before the board repeatedly. Despite exemplary behavior and support from prison staff, including lieutenants and chaplains, freedom remained elusive.
I went to the parole board for the first time in 1997. Because I had to have 15 years done on a sentence, so I got there in 1997. That's what I was allowed.
The board's response? Continue to expiration, 2037.
Denied the parole and recommended I continued expiration of sentence, which would be 2037.
Everything changed in October 2015.
But I was released from the physical confinement of the fenced-in Coleman prison, in October 22nd of 2015. I got out of prison in 2016.
After 35 years behind bars, Jim walked free.
I did 35 years, 3 months and 11 days in prison, in jails in prison, without a break.
His first stop? A halfway house in Daytona Beach. 6 months of home confinement followed. Then came 5 years of supervised release.
I got released in 15 to the halfway house. And I have the 6-month halfway house, and then I had 6 months home confinement. And that was here in Daytona. So I was released from the physical prison, but still in the BOP for the first year. And then I did 5 years on paper.
5 years on paper.
And that took it to 21,
But here's the most dramatic turn. In 2019, at age 75, Jim faced pancreatic cancer. The doctors caught it early, another miracle in a life increasingly defined by them.
I was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. I was 75 years old. They caught it really early, and that's where the total miracle of God starts in.
Today at 81, he rides 3 Harley Davidsons, a 2018 Fat Boy, a 2023 Freewheeler trike, and a Dyna. His current role? outreach director at Redemption Community Biker Church in Holly Hill, Florida. The same commanding presence that once led outlaw bikers now guides souls to salvation. He's been there for 8 years, sharing his testimony and leading worship at the Iron Horse.
We've been up and operational for 8 years.
Yeah,
I think about 8
years
years. And Big Jim Nolan, 1%er, is our outreach director.
The numbers paint a picture of transformation, from leading 200 outlaws to touching countless lives through ministry, from 59 years sentenced to complete freedom, from facing death to celebrating life. His story has become a testament to second chances. Want to know the most powerful part? Jim Nolan hasn't changed who he is. He's transformed what he does with who he is. Still a member of his motorcycle club after 57 years, still commanding respect, but now using that influence for a higher purpose.
I still am in the same motorcycle club I've been in for the past 57 years. I'm not retired, I'm not laid down, I'm an active member, and I have no shame in being a member of the Outlaw Motorcycle Club. No shame whatsoever.
His message to those on the fence about faith.
If you have the feeling that you're supposed to accept the Lord Jesus Christ as your Savior, do it. Because you're not promised tomorrow. And if you don't do it, you're in trouble. And if you're on the fence already, God's calling you. You didn't climb up on the fence. You got called.
After all, who better to understand the journey from darkness to light than someone who's walked every step of that path? As Jim likes to say, I'm still Big Jim, just with a different mission. And that might be the most powerful testimony of all.